It makes no change in our debt course that does not create growth, but simply borrows more. I see my colleague, the Democratic whip, I'll call him, and would appreciate the opportunity to share these remarks and would yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Illinois.
I thank my friend from Alabama for yielding. I have 13 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders. I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and be printed in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, earlier today, my colleague from New Hampshire, Senator Ayotte, came to the floor and spoke about the medium air defense system, known as MEADS or MEADS. This is a program that the United States has been developing for air defense with our NATO allies. So U.S. taxpayers are truly investing in this program, but our allies are as well. Now, I'm new to this assignment as chairman of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, and I don't take any pleasure in what I'm about to say, but it's a fact, and I think we've got to put the facts out before the American people. As we started developing this system, we reached the point where we concluded, the Department of Defense concluded, that it wouldn't work. That happens. Some of the greatest ideas turn out not to be feasible, and that is where we are at this point. The question that's been raised by Senator Ayotte is, well, if it doesn't work, why do you want to finish the research on it this year? It's a legitimate question, and the vast majority of Americans would say, of course she's right. Don't spend another penny on it. The problem is this. We entered into an agreement with our allies that if we terminated the program, there were penalties that would be assessed to the United States that we would owe to other nations who participated in funding the research. And it turns out that the amount of money needed to finish the program is about equal to the penalties we'd pay if we just terminated it at this moment. So we tried to make the best of a very bad situation. The Department of Defense Appropriations Act for 2013 includes $380 million, a reduction of $20 million from the original request, for the Department to bring an orderly close to the medium air defense system by either completing the development program or paying the termination. This is a NATO program, as I said, that we jointly developed with the Germans and Italians. All of us thought this was a good idea and a good investment. It wasn't until we got into it that we realized it wasn't going to do what it said it would do. The Department determined it will not procure MEADS, but has requested funds for the final year to conclude development of the program and live up to the agreement with these countries, our allies, who've also put money into this. The Department plans to use the advanced technology that we did develop here to upgrade other systems. So it's not a complete waste, and it shouldn't be, because the taxpayers have their tax dollars on the line. I share the frustration of many of my colleagues that we've spent so much money and so many years and have reached this point. But I will tell you, we don't want to build a system that doesn't work. We don't want to create false security. And we do want some honesty from those who are developing these systems if, in fact, something that we've spent money on is not going to reach its completion. The cost to finish the development of this program is almost exactly the same as the cost to unilaterally terminate it, a point not made by the senator from New Hampshire. She argues about all the savings from this program in terminating it, but doesn't talk about the termination costs we are liable for as a result of that termination. It is just unrealistic to assume that you can terminate a major defense program with our allies and walk away without some obligation. For example, when the Army's Future Combat Systems program was terminated, the Department was legally obligated to pay over $500 million in termination liability. In return, we received several technologies that were incorporated into other programs. The same applies to MEADS, but only if we fulfill our obligations and pay the termination liability. The Defense Appropriation Bill is fiscally responsible by providing the funding to the Army to bring this program to an orderly close instead of levying another bill on the Department in times of fiscal constraint. I urge my colleagues, if the Ayotte amendment does come to the floor, to oppose it, not because I am asking them to vote for a program which we're in agreement is never going to reach the goal that it was setting out to reach, but rather let's be honest about this. We're going to pay this money one way or the other. The Army has said give us the option to complete the program or pay the termination fee. That, to me, is a more reasonable approach. And, Mr. President, I ask for consent to enter after my statement in the record statements and letters from a variety of different sources, including the Department of Defense, on this program.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, almost a year and a half ago, I sent the Government Accountability Office a letter asking them to examine the FDA, Food and Drug Administration's adverse event reporting system for dietary supplements. Dietary supplements are common across America. Vitamin pills, mineral pills. There are shops all over Chicago and downstate Illinois selling these supplements, and many people, including myself, take a vitamin each day. Maybe it's good for me, maybe it isn't. I hope it's good. It's certainly not harmful. But there are thousands and thousands of dietary supplements for sale. They're not all made in the United States, and they're not all made to the highest specifications. So we said to the Food and Drug Administration, we want you to collect information from American consumers if there's a problem. If there's a dietary supplement that's being sold and someone has an adverse event, in other words, a health event that could be serious, report it to the FDA. If we receive more than one, it's worth taking a look at to see if there's a pattern emerging and we should take something off the shelf. Today, the General Accountability Office released a report assessing how the system is working on this adverse event reporting on dietary supplements, and they had some recommendations. This reporting system is an important surveillance tool the FDA uses to identify and respond to cases of serious adverse reaction, such as heart attacks, hospitalizations, in some cases death. Over the years, the types of dietary supplements sold has evolved from some very basic formulas like simple vitamin C and calcium supplements to include products with potentially serious side effects, and even foods and beverages masquerading as dietary supplements that could pose a significant danger. Take a look at these energy drinks that are for sale everywhere. Try to get past the cash register at your local gas station without running into a 5-hour energy drink or a Monster energy drink, and for some of them, when you turn the container to the back, you'll see that it's not being sold as a beverage. It's being sold as a dietary supplement, in other words, like a vitamin or a mineral. There's a reason for that, because if it's sold as a beverage, there are some strict regulations on the amount of caffeine that can be included. If it's sold as a dietary supplement, the regulations are not there, at least not in the same way as they would be for beverages. Unfortunately, people are led to believe that these products have all been approved by the FDA and pose no risk. In reality, unlike drugs or over-the-counter drugs, dietary supplements are not reviewed and tested by the FDA for safety or effectiveness before being sold to the American public. That'll come as a surprise to a lot of people. Most dietary supplements today are safe, and they're used by millions of Americans as part of their personal choice for a healthy lifestyle. That's not true of all supplements. In 2002, a 16-year-old boy named Sean Riggins from Lincoln, Illinois, just a few miles away from my home in Springfield, died. The 16-year-old boy died after taking a dietary supplement containing a drug known as ephedra. Sean was a high school football player. Before playing in the game, he went to the local gas station and bought something called Yellow Jackets. It was a form of ephedra clearly marketed to children to give them an energy boost. How often do you hear that? Sean washed the pills down with a bottle of Mountain Dew. Sean was unable to finish the football game that day and died of a heart attack. Before his death, Metabolife, the largest manufacturer of supplements containing ephedra, claimed they had no ephedra-related adverse events to report. This is 2002. Under pressure, Metabolife later gave FDA over 13,000 ephedra-related adverse event reports that showed people taking their products with ephedra and getting sick. In 2006, I worked with Senators Orrin Hatch and Tom Harkin to pass the Dietary Supplement and Non-Prescription Drug Consumer Protection Act. The law requires dietary supplement manufacturers to report serious adverse events to the Food and Drug Administration. Today's GAO report shows that since the law was enacted, serious adverse events reported to the FDA have increased dramatically, from 400 reports of serious events in 2007 to 6,307 between 2008 and 2011. The GAO report highlights commendable efforts by the FDA to improve the safety of dietary supplements. In 2008, the FDA only conducted 120 inspections in the United States. By 2012, that number was up to 400 inspections. Between 2008 and 2011, FDA took 19 regulatory actions, including warning letters, injunctions against companies that didn't report as required, like reporting serious adverse events, but omitting contact information on their labels. That's pretty basic, isn't it? When you buy a product like a dietary supplement, you ought to at least know who made it and how you contact the people who made it. If something goes wrong, if there's a question, you need to contact someone. That basic information should be there. In addition to outlining steps FDA has taken to strengthen the adverse event reporting system and protect consumers, the GAO report also suggests ways the FDA can improve this process. For instance, in some cases, FDA has used these adverse event reports to inform actions to protect consumers. But the agency could do more and develop ways to educate consumers about potentially harmful products. The GAO report encourages the FDA to issue final guidance clarifying the definition of a conventional food and dietary supplement. The vague distinction between a dietary supplement and conventional food or beverage has created a murky, growing market where some companies sell products potentially dangerous with unimproved ingredients. Products like Lazy Cakes, a brownie marketed as a dietary supplement, not as a cookie, but as a dietary supplement that contains roughly 8 milligrams of the sleep aid melatonin, almost double the upper limit of a typical dose. And energy drinks sold in huge 16, 24, and 32-ounce cans right next to soda and Gatorade. Soda and Gatorade are regulated. The energy drinks are not. How would a consumer know? The GAO report also encourages the FDA to work with the poison control centers to establish a debt-sharing agreement. Mr. President, this is a source of real frustration. And when I describe the situation, you'll understand why. As you can imagine, when somebody feels sick after using a supplement, they don't usually call the Food and Drug Administration. They call a local hospital or the poison control centers, which are all across America. Between 2008 and 2010, poison control centers heard from 1,000 more people who had experienced adverse events with dietary supplements than the Food and Drug Administration did. Poison control centers information could be a meaningful contribution to the information the FDA is receiving about harmful products, information that can help us protect American consumers. I encourage the Food and Drug Administration and poison control centers to work together to share this information. They are now, sadly, the Poison Control Center is demanding millions and millions of dollars that the FDA doesn't have just to get access to the basic information about dangerous products sold in America that are causing harm to Americans. Holding back this information is not in the best interest of keeping America healthy and safe. Moving forward, I'm going to continue to work with the FDA to enhance the regulation of dietary supplements and ensure customers have the information they need to make informed decisions. Every time I come to the floor and say anything about dietary supplements, I can guarantee you that at some website somewhere they're saying, here comes Durbin again, he's going to take your vitamin pills away, he's going to make it so that you need a prescription to take vitamin C. Not the case at all. That is not what I'm arguing for. Let me tell you what my bill, the Dietary Supplement Labeling Act, would do. It addresses the growing concern of dietary supplements with misleading information and the bad actors selling them. This bill would require more information on labels. People using dietary supplements have the right to know if there's a risk associated with the product. Some ingredients may be safe for the general population, but risky for groups like kids or pregnant women. Or the ingredients included in there might be dangerous for people with special conditions like diabetes or high blood pressure. The bill would also help curb the growing practice of foods and beverages with added ingredients masquerading as dietary supplements by directing the FDA to establish a definition for conventional foods. This definition would clarify for industry, consumers, and even the FDA what products are foods and which products are dietary supplements. Today, you just can't tell. If you got the time and good eyes, go into that gas station and take a look at some of these energy drinks and then look at the bottle of Gatorade or soda right next to it in the case. One is regulated on contents of caffeine, the other, the dietary supplement, virtually unregulated. Many people would be surprised to learn that the FDA doesn't even know how many dietary supplements are being sold in the United States. I'll bet you a majority of American people just are sure that their government is testing those things that are on the shelves. Not necessarily. Most people don't know if a dietary supplement ingredient presents any serious health concerns. The FDA doesn't have the information, incidentally, to track down products containing these harmful ingredients in many circumstances. The Dietary Supplement Labeling Act, which I'm introducing, would require dietary supplement makers to give the FDA the name of each supplement they produce, along with a description, a list of ingredients, and a copy of the label. Is that onerous? Is that the heavy hand of government? If you want to sell a dietary supplement product in America, isn't it reasonable that you at least register the product, the name of it, its ingredients, the name and address of the company that can be reached if something goes wrong? That, to me, sounds very basic, and I hope that my colleagues will consider supporting it. With that information, the FDA would be better equipped to protect consumers' health and to work with supplement manufacturers to address problems as they arise. Mr. President, I visited dietary supplement companies in Chicago. I'm impressed. They take it seriously. It looks, as you hope it will look, like a very sterile, professional environment with medical professionals on board. The same cannot be said of all the things we're importing from all over the world. If you take a look and see the product was made in China, you may have some second thoughts about buying it or giving it to your children. We've had some scandals associated with adulterated products coming in from China. I would pause if that was the source of a dietary supplement. I'd have more confidence if it's made in the United States, particularly by a reputable dealer that I've seen on the shelves of the local drugstore over and over again. Let me reiterate, most dietary supplements available in America today are safe and are used by millions of Americans as part of a healthy lifestyle. As I said, I am one of the consumers taking that dietary supplement, multivitamin, every morning. But the GAO report confirms that there's still work to be done to enhance the FDA's adverse event reporting system and to assure that people who take these products have the information they need to make healthy, informed decisions. Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I'd ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be rescinded.
No objection. So ordered.
Mr. President, I'm back to the Senate floor today with my favorite chart, one that I think is indicative of the fiscal dysfunction that is occurring here in Congress, particularly in the Senate, now marking 1,420 days without a budget. But people should be encouraged that as a result of the House passing a no budget, no pay bill, that it's finally prompted our friends across the aisle to mark up a budget in the Budget Committee, and it will come to the floor here in the next few days, and we'll be having a lot of important discussions and debates about budgets, taxes, and debt ratios. But I hope everyone remembers what this is really about. It's not just about numbers. It's about our obligation, our moral obligation to future generations of Americans. And I would just footnote that the President in a recent interview said that we don't have an immediate debt problem. And to say that, Mr. President, The debt is discouraging and retarding economic growth, which we need in order to get Americans back to work. And that's why unemployment at 8% roughly, with some 23 million Americans either out of work or underemployed working part-time when they'd like to work full-time, is a national tragedy, and why we need to get our fiscal house in order here so we can put America back to work and grow our economy and opportunity. Like many in this chamber, my father was a member of what we call the greatest generation. I think Tom Brokaw coined that phrase, talking about the World War II generation that fought and won a world war. My dad was a B-17 pilot, and on his 26th bombing mission over Mannheim, Germany, was shot down and captured as a prisoner of war. Well, thank goodness, after 4 months, he was released from captivity, thanks to General Patton and his army sweeping through that part of Germany at the end of World War II. But my father and others like him fought to ensure that his children and his grandchildren would grow up in a country that had a greater opportunity than he himself and my mother had when they were alive. And indeed, that is every parent's dream, that their children and their grandchildren would enjoy more opportunity, more freedom, a higher standard of living than they themselves had, which is a reason why parents and grandparents sacrifice and why they work hard for their kids and grandkids, because of their hope and their belief in that dream. And as a result, my dad and my mother and countless other members of the greatest generation left this country better off than they found it. The question for all of us today is, will the present generation do the same? I certainly hope so. And I'm doing everything I know how to do as one senator to make sure we do. As a parent, I want nothing but the best for my two daughters. My wife and I want and hope and pray for the best for them. As an American, I want to see every child, everyone's sons and daughters, succeed and prosper. But right now, we have in effect a war being waged against America's youth. And I know some might consider that hyperbole or perhaps unnecessarily inflammatory, but let me explain to you why I do believe that you could logically conclude we have a war waging against America's youth. Consider the following. Our national debt is close to $17 trillion. That means every child born in America today comes into this world owing $53,000 in debt. Meanwhile, the federal government is spending more than $200 billion a year on interest payments alone. The Medicare Hospital Insurance Trust Fund, Medicare, is projected to go bankrupt within 11 years. And we're looking at more than $100 trillion in unfunded liabilities. That is, promises that we've made to future generations for which we have no clue how we're going to currently pay for those. That's what unfunded liabilities mean. And we know that the younger generation has virtually no hope that Medicare and Social Security will be there for them when they retire unless we act, and we must act. But rather than reform and protect our existing programs like Medicare and Social Security, the President chose in his first year in office to create yet a new entitlement program funded by a $1 trillion tax increase. Of course, we all know it goes by the name of Obamacare, or if you prefer, the Affordable Care Act, which I think if you look at it, history will ultimately lead us to conclude that it was unaffordable not the Affordable Care Act, but the Unaffordable Care Act. One impact of Obamacare is that young people under the age of 40 are going to have to pay higher and higher health insurance premiums. And you might ask, how is that possible since they are the healthiest people in America today? Well, this is a phenomenon known as age banding, which says under Obamacare that seniors can pay no more than 3 times what young, healthy people pay for their health insurance. But it's no secret that older Americans incur higher medical expenses by virtue of their advancing years, and yet they can only pay 3 times what young, healthy people pay for health insurance. Well, that will lead to much higher premiums for young people in America. Indeed, one recent survey found that premium costs for young and healthy Americans will increase by an average of 169%. Now, I have no way of knowing whether that prediction will be entirely accurate, but I can promise you that health insurance premiums for young, healthy Americans will continue to rise under the current law known as Obamacare. Such a dramatic rise in health insurance premiums will come at a time when young workers and middle-class families are already struggling to make ends meet. After all, the median household income in America has fallen by more than $2,400 since June 2009. In other words, average households in America are not just treading water, maintaining their place. They are losing. They're taking on water. And they are $2,400 poorer today than they were in June 2009. Not only will Obamacare drive up insurance premiums for younger Americans, it also is destroying jobs. In fact, we already have evidence that many full-time jobs are being reduced to part-time jobs in preparation for Obamacare's costs and regulation. In particular, many places where young people get a start in their work life, working in restaurants, working in hotels, working for retailers, those very same employers are now replacing full-time jobs with part-time jobs in order to avoid the crushing cost of Obamacare. And so this will hurt younger Americans more than anyone else. And then there's this. While unemployment is generally speaking about 7.9%, the Congressional Budget Office expects it to go up to 8% by the end of this year, fewer and fewer people are still looking for jobs. It's called the labor participation rate. You can go online and look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they will show you that the number of people looking for work as a percentage of the population is as low as it's been for 30 years. So not only are people having a hard time finding full-time work, if they can find work at all, some have simply given up. A new study shows that Americans in their 20s and 30s, or I should say the unemployment rate among teenagers is over 25% now, and a new study shows that Americans in their 20s and 30s are accumulating savings at a much slower rate than their parents did. And what we find among many young Americans and not so young Americans is they are living off of their 401k or their retirement savings now at unprecedented rates. I just ask my colleagues, is this really the future we want to leave our children and grandchildren? Will this leave them better off than we were, or will it leave them worse off? I know that no one in this chamber and no American in this country wants to leave their children and grandchildren worse off than they are. And that's why we have to do everything we can to reverse the federal overreach of the past 4 years and to boost economic opportunity with policies that will promote fiscal health, strong job creation, and upward mobility. In other words, We need to embrace policies that expand our economy and not government. We don't need people more dependent on government. We need more people independent and prospering on their own because we have a growing economy that provides opportunity for them to work, to save, and to support their families and deliver to their children and grandchildren greater prosperity than they inherited from their parents. That's the future that Americans want, and that's the future we must strive to deliver. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Quorum?
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
The quorum.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I rise today to discuss an
The
amendment.
senator from Missouri is recognized.
I thank the President, and I rise today, Mr. President, to discuss an amendment that's been filed by my friend Senator Moran that I'm proud to be a supporter of. This amendment would stop the Federal Aviation Administration from targeting air traffic control towers across the country, including the towers that are considered to be in the contract tower program under sequestration. As I've said before on this floor and will continue to say, many of these problems will be resolved, I'm convinced, if the Appropriations Committee does its work, and that work is recognized and debated on the floor. And hopefully we're not having this same kind of discussion October 1 when we begin the new spending year. But the impact of sequestering, cutting from this account is real. Senator Moran's amendment is important. It's something that the communities served by these towers could be impacted by, and this amendment tries to be sure that these communities aren't impacted. In our state, there are contract towers in Missouri, in Branson, in Joplin, in Columbia, in Jefferson City, and St. Joseph. All those could be affected depending on how the FAA administers this cut in the contract tower line. A number of other airports in Missouri, including Springfield, downtown Kansas City, and downtown St. Louis, could lose their towers in the after midnight service, and those planes that now land there after midnight would either not do that or would do that without the support of the tower that they have now that assists in landing. This amendment of Senator Moran's would protect those towers as well as the federally funded portion of 16 cost-share towers, which also could be closed at the end of this fiscal year. Specifically, this amendment takes $50 million from one place in the FAA. In fact, it's $50 million in research and capital funds that is money that could easily be set aside for this short period of time so that these towers don't close, and then Senator Moran would add $50 million in the Federal Aviation Administration operations account. It makes it clear, the amendment makes it clear that the contract tower program and contract tower cost-sharing programs are subject to the 5% sequestration cuts, but again would transfer enough money within accounts that there should be money to keep these important towers open in Missouri, in Kansas, in Maryland, in Alaska, in every state, and many states, almost every state has something that would be impacted by this contract tower. This $50 million would be more than 95% of the estimated money necessary to be sure that the contract tower program and the cost share program would stay in place. If you're using one of these airports, if you bought a ticket to travel out of one of these airports, if you're a general aviation customer at one of these airports, the tower is one of the things that you have expected your tax dollars to be spent on, and what Senator Moran is doing is just trying to find a way to do that that still allows sequestration to occur, that still keeps the spending below the spending cap in the law, and it really is exactly in sync with the spirit of the law as well as the letter of the law. It just tries to solve a problem. You know, I'd like to solve this problem with in another way by just saying that federal funds and employees who are involved in public safety have to be prioritized as people that would show up. And we're going to move forward with that particular view legislatively if we can't get it added to this spending bill that gets us from now till the end of the year. And again, Mr. President, it's my hope that we're not talking next year about how we get to the end of the year because we figure out how to get to the end of the year at the beginning of the year. That doesn't sound like an incredible goal for the Senate to have, but in a Senate that hasn't voted on a single appropriations bill for 16 months, updating the spending in 70% or so of the spending, 5 of the 12 bills, 5 of the bills that spend 70% of the money, in this added to this continuing resolution, I think is in the spirit of what our new chairman wants to do, what our new ranking member wants to do, and what the Senate should want to do, which is let's deal with these things in the regular way, let's debate spending in the regular way. I would very much like to see Senator Moran's amendment included in what we're doing today, and just as importantly, I want to work with Senator Moran to see that as we look toward October 1, these kinds of issues don't have to become a regular part of our process, but are the kinds of things that we'll look back and say, remember we failed to do our job the regular way and all the problem that created. Let's get back to regular order, and I would yield.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maryland.
Mr. President, before the senator from Missouri leaves the floor, I'd just like to comment. First of all, I personally would like to thank him for all of his cooperation in trying to help move this bill forward within the Senate. It is characteristic of both him and the spirit in which Vice Chairman Shelby and I are undertaking that we really try to work together to get this bill disposed of in an orderly way to avoid a government shutdown. It is not the bill we like, but it is the bill that is presented to us. And at the same time, to begin to establish both a tone, a decorum, and a process that we could get to regular order. I share the Senator from Missouri's frustration that we are dealing with a really big bill. It is this legislation pending here is all 12 of the separate appropriations bills. It is very difficult to parse them out, to have rational conversations on matters of policy. So I would hope that this time next year we would not, or at the end of that by the end, as we get to the fiscal year, October 1st, which is our fiscal New Year's Eve, we will have had an orderly disposal. We can agree on process and procedure, then we can have the debate on policy. There should be a debate on policy. There should be a debate on funding. I am not one who likes to contain debate or to contain amendments. But the clock is ticking. We have two big issues before us. One, the funding for the rest of the fiscal year for fiscal 13, and then we have the budget for fiscal 14 that Senator Murray and Senator Sessions wants to bring. I would like if we could bring our bill to an orderly close and move to the budget debate so that when we take our Easter Passover break, we would show the people of America we could govern, first of all, dispose of two major policy considerations, and that we would have done it with decorum, with dignity, with civility, and pretty robust conversation. Mr. President, I yield the floor. Mr. President,
Senator from Maryland.
I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Senate gaveling in this morning at 10 Eastern to resume consideration of the continuing resolution to keep government operations running for the rest of fiscal year 2013. The Senate is expected to recess at 12:30 to 2:15 for their weekly party caucus lunches. Over on the House side, the House beginning debate on fiscal year 2014 GOP budget measure and 5 alternatives. The House also taking up a resolution that would continue or actually provide committee funding for the 113th Congress. A couple of news stories very quickly. A Senate panel has approved Mary Jo White's nomination to lead the Securities and Exchange Commission, and they sent it along for a final vote. The Senate Banking Committee approved White's nomination on a 21-to-1 vote. Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio was the only member to object. Mary Jo White is expected to be confirmed by the full Senate and become the first former prosecutor to lead the agency that oversees Wall Street. And the panel also advanced Richard Cordray's nomination to continue as director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, but his nomination was approved on a 12-to-10 party line vote. All Republican members opposed the nomination. They have also opposed the newly created agency itself, and they've expressed interest in curtailing Richard Cordray's power. Republicans are expected to block a final vote on Richard Cordray's nomination. As we wait for further debate on the CR here in the Senate, House Speaker John Boehner held a briefing this morning, joined by other Republican leaders. They discussed the budget negotiations that are going on in the House and Senate.
That's interesting. Morning, everybody. This is a good week for House Republicans because this is the week where we bring to the country a responsible, balanced budget. The reason we are balancing our budget is because it is a necessary means to an end, which is to improve people's lives. Our balanced budget plan balances the budget without raising taxes. We're actually growing the economy. It fosters a healthier, stronger economy so we can create more jobs. There's an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today where two Stanford economists say that this budget, if enacted, would grow the economy faster first year and the last year. Almost $1,400 would accrue to a household in the first year, $4,000 for a family in the last year of the budget. Because if we balance the budget by getting government to live within its means, that produces certainty. If we reform the tax code, open up our energy, if we get spending under control and reform our entitlements so that people can count on the promises that government has made them, that helps the economy. That improves people's lives. This stands in Democrats are bringing forward. If there's one consistent theme you see with all the various budgets the Democrats are bringing forward, including the Senate budget introduced by Senator Patty Murray, it is this. It proposes even higher taxes. It proposes deep cuts to national security, more provider cuts to Medicare, only to be outdone by even higher spending increases. And so the one theme we've seen from the Democratic budgets here is $1 trillion in higher taxes or higher, only outdone by even higher spending than if we did nothing. Taxing more, borrowing more, and spending more is not a path to prosperity. It is not going to give us a healthy economy. This is why we're proposing a responsible, balanced budget. The only difference between the Democrats in the Congress and the Republicans is in the budgets we're passing, but at least we're bringing budgets forward. The President hasn't even proposed a budget yet. The law requires that the President of the United States submit his budget in the first Monday in February, and he is missing in action. That is not leadership. That is ducking responsibility. We are at least bringing our budgets to the floor, showing the American people how we would govern. And we are showing here is a responsible path to a balanced budget, which we think is far better than yet another tax increase and more spending and borrowing, which would evolve into a debt crisis. But at least we're showing leadership. We would like to see some similar leadership come from other folks around town. With that, I'd like to introduce the Speaker.
Well, I want to thank Chairman Ryan and members of our Budget Committee for a job well done. This is the third year that we've brought forward as a majority a plan to balance the budget. This budget will, in fact, balance in 10 years. And for American families, a balanced budget means more jobs. It means more opportunities. It means affordable energy. And it also means a more secure retirement. Listen, we balanced the budget back in the mid-'90s along with President Bill Clinton. And out of that plan, we actually did balance the budget and led to one of the healthiest economies we've had. President Obama should do likewise. Work with the Republicans in Congress together to put forward a plan that will, in fact, balance the budget and help American families enjoy real prosperity and a much more secure retirement.
Good morning. This is a good week for House Republicans. This is also a week of contrast. Our budget balances in 10 years. Their budget never balances and raises $1 trillion worth of taxes. I think the question for the American people is, which budget actually helps? Which helps people? Well, I would say that a balanced budget is going to help grow our economy and provide the certainty needed to so many people out there looking for the government to do the very same thing they're having to do at home. Which budget helps those who are in need? Our budget provides a prescription to save the social safety nets of Medicare, of Medicaid. Theirs doesn't. Theirs brings about the demise of those programs. Which budget brings about the kind of tax reform that people want in this country? Lower rates, fair and simpler tax code. Our budget does that. There's raises taxes to the tune of almost $1 trillion. The choice is clear. Our budget is pro-growth. It will help people get back to work. It will help those in need. And that's why we're going to have a great vote this week on the floor in the House.
Well, as I look out, only one got the green tie memo, so the rest of us did. But you're going to hear some of the same things from all of us, because there's a direct contrast between where we are going and where the Democrats are going. Either you want more of the tax and spend, or you want a future that balances.
Unanimous consent to speak for up to, say, 15 minutes as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I am here once again to sound an alarm about carbon pollution's damage to our oceans and to our climate. It is past time for Congress to wake up to our responsibility as elected officials and as stewards of this planet. The alarm has been sounded by the scientific community, which overwhelmingly warns about the effects of our carbon dioxide emissions on our atmosphere and oceans. Our defense and intelligence communities warn of the threats posed by climate change to national security and international stability. Economists recognize the distortion of energy markets that overlook the true cost of carbon pollution. And government accountants now list climate change as a threat to our fiscal stability. Now, today, as we enter the Passover and Easter season, and as Catholics the world over celebrate the selection of a new pope, we turn to voices of faith. They too call upon us. They call upon us to heed the moral imperatives of protecting creation and seeking justice for all people. They call upon us to reflect on our faith, on our relationship to our world and each other, and on our responsibility to future generations. And they call upon us, as President Obama reminded us in his inaugural address, to preserve our planet commanded to our care by God. I lay no claim to religious authority, but I must believe this: something that harms others, something that disturbs God's creation, something that stands on lies and greed, protecting that must not be consistent with God's will. In his 2010 World Day of Peace message entitled, "If You Want to Cultivate Peace, Protect Creation," Pope Benedict XVI called upon the faithful, and I quote, to protect the environment and to safeguard natural resources and the climate, while at the same time taking into due account the solidarity we owe to those living in the poorer areas of our world and to future generations. In his inaugural Mass this morning, Pope Francis said, and I quote, "Please, I would like to ask all those who have positions of responsibility in economic, political, and social life, and all men and women of goodwill, let us be protectors of creation, protectors of God's plan inscribed in nature, protectors of one another and of the environment." As early news reports indicated, the new pope chose his papal name, Francis, out of respect for St. Francis's sense of obligation to God's creation. And he noted in one of his very earliest comments that our relationship with God's creation is not so good right now. And of course, the Pope is not the only one. Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew I of Constantinople, the spiritual leader of the world's Orthodox Christians, also urges us to remember those most affected by climate change. Climate change is much more than an issue of environmental preservation, the Patriarch says. Climate change constitutes a matter of social and economic justice. Here in the United States, hundreds of evangelical leaders signed the Evangelical Climate Initiative Statement, which declares love of God, love of neighbor, and the demands of stewardship are more than enough reason for evangelical Christians to respond to the climate change problem with moral passion and concrete action. The Hindu Declaration on Climate Change affirms that, quote, the dire problems besetting our world will all be magnified many-fold by the predicted impacts of climate change. And Buddhist leaders, including the Dalai Lama, urge both individual and institutional transformation to confront what they call the gravest challenge that humanity has ever faced, the ecological consequences of our own collective karma. As Reverend Fletcher Harper of the Interfaith Coalition Green Faith explains, all faith-based communities have a spiritual connection to the natural world. For example, Sheikh Ali Goma, the internationally respected Egyptian Islamist, sees this connection as central to a faithful life. I will read. If we take seriously our role as God's deputies on earth, not just by benefiting from the environment, but by preserving it and ensuring that other communities and generations will have the same possibilities to drink clean water, breathe fresh air, and live in a world that is in harmony with itself and with ourselves, we may hope to be among those who are beloved to God due to their care for His creation. For many, Madam President, faith compels work toward fairness and justice for all living beings, regardless of nationality or social status, and encourages us to consider the effects of our actions on future generations. For many individuals all over the world, the fight against climate change is a moral call. As Americans, we have a tradition of calling upon our own deeply held spiritual convictions to address our society's greatest moral challenges. People of faith are answering that call, from major denominational governing bodies down to local parishes and synagogues. Representative Henry Waxman and I, as part of our work on the bicameral task force on climate change, recently wrote to 300 groups to ask for their views on actions the federal government could take to reduce carbon pollution and strengthen our resiliency to climate change. A number of those organizations which answered are religious organizations. And I ask unanimous consent to submit letters from 6 of these groups to the congressional record.
Without objection.